This podcast is developed by BridgeBio to educate ourselves and the public about living with a rare disease. Since our guests aren't scripted and are free to speak their minds, their views and opinions don't necessarily reflect the views and policy of BridgeBio Pharma. Now, we hope you enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to On Rare, an exclusive podcast produced by BridgeBio, a biotech company that focuses on developing treatments for rare diseases. Behind each unique condition is a unique story, and at On Rare, we have the privilege to listen and learn from the true experts, people living with some of the rarest conditions. I'm your host, Mandy Rohrig, a member of the patient advocacy team at BridgeBio, and I'm joined by my colleague, David Rintel.
Thanks, Mandy. In a moment, we're going to hear from Inês Alves, the mother of 3 children, one of whom has achondroplasia. Inês lives in Portugal and is also an activist in the achondroplasia community in Portugal. But before we hear from Inês, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Daniela Rogoff, the medical lead for achondroplasia at QED Therapeutics. I've known Daniela for many years, and she's just one of the colleagues I most admire, so I'm really happy to have her join us on this podcast. Hi, Daniela.
Hi, David, and thank you so much for the nice introduction. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. You and I have been working in achondroplasia for a while with the QED team, but most of our colleagues really don't know very much about achondroplasia. So perhaps we could just start at the beginning and allow me to ask you the simplest question, which is, what is achondroplasia?
Achondroplasia is a rare genetic condition that affects how the bones form and grow. The way that bones grow is regulated by multiple factors in the body. A group of them that are called fibroblast growth factors act on growth by attaching receptors that are called FGFRs or FGF receptors. One of the FGF receptors, the FGFR3, regulates the growth of bones by slowing it down. A change in the gene results in a receptor that is on all the time. This ultimately makes the bones grow slower and in an irregular manner.
Thank you. So achondroplasia is a genetic condition, but it is not generally inherited. That's always been interesting to me, and I wonder if you can explain this condition, which is genetic, but in general not inherited.
Yes, so approximately 80% of the cases occur in a family with no history of achondroplasia, and children are born to parents of average stature. This is because of what is called de novo mutation, or a change that occurs for the first time in the family. That's why it's a genetic condition, because it's a change in a gene that results in the condition, but it's the first presentation in a family. That's why they are called de novo mutations. And those are most of the cases of children with achondroplasia.
Oh, that's really interesting. And the other 20%, would those be the children of adults who have achondroplasia when they have children? So they carry that gene then to the next generation.
Exactly. And they can pass it. And this is what is called autosomal dominant, meaning that only one of the copies of the gene being different or having that variant.
And how does achondroplasia affect, let's just start with a young child. What's it like for the people living with achondroplasia?
This condition is characterized by disproportionate short stature, where the arms and legs are short compared to the torso and the head is large in relation to the rest of the body. But even when those are the most evident features, almost all the bones are affected, which cause numerous and lifelong complications that can be sometimes life-threatening. Many of the complications are associated with achondroplasia. During infancy, I think that one of the most frightful ones is the sudden infant death. And this is as consequence of one of the most serious complications, that is the narrowing of the opening that connects the head to the spine, called foramen magnum. This can result in an increase in the pressure inside the cranium, compression of the structures that go from the head to the neck, and central sleep apnea, that is a stop in the breathing while the child is sleeping. It can be very serious and can result in death. There are many other complications that occur during childhood. One of them, for example, is frequent ear infections. Obesity is also common. It affects approximately 50% of the children. There are several orthopedic complications that are present, such as bowing of the legs that can impact their walk and result in pain and later damage of the knee joint. There are some orthopedic complications at the spine level with hyperlordosis or kyphosis, that is like bending forward and bending the spine backwards. Then later in life, one of the most debilitating complications in adults are the spinal stenosis that can result in compression of the spinal cord or nerves with debilitating symptoms like pain, numbness, weakness, not being able to walk. So there is a lot of complications that are associated with achondroplasia.
Thank you, Daniela. My next question is a bit more complicated. We've learned that the community of short stature don't consider short stature to be a disability, and we of course respect that. But at the same time, it sounds like there are some very serious health complications that occur in achondroplasia.
Yes, so as you mentioned, achondroplasia is not a condition that just affects height. It's a condition that compromises the individual health and the individual and their family's quality of life. I think that the concern that the part of the community may have is because when there are new drugs that are being developed for achondroplasia, one of the evaluations that need to be done to determine whether the drug seems to be providing any benefit is the change in the height. However, the community would like to see potentially that these new drugs that are being developed will provide not only a change in the height, but on some of the other health-related complications of achondroplasia.
Another thing I think needs to be acknowledged by us is that a lot of the quote-unquote disability experienced by people with short stature, like people with achondroplasia, is really kind of imposed societally because the world is not made for little people.
Exactly.
And we hear from parents about their concerns about children being bullied and people being objectified because of their short stature and seen as just so different than those of us of average height.
Absolutely. It's a very important point. It's the world not being adapted. The challenges that we all as a society have of being more inclusive and we are all different. We need to accept everybody as they are.
Well, thank you so much, Daniela. It has been a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm sure you'll join me in listening to Inês and her perspective of being a parent of a daughter with achondroplasia and an activist. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'm really pleased to introduce Inês Alves. We met, I think, 3.5 years ago on the telephone when Inês called us at QED Therapeutics and said, I hear you have infigratinib. Let's talk. Infigratinib is a medicine that is being tested for achondroplasia. It's also used for a rare form of cancer. So Inês, welcome. We're really going to talk to you first in your role as a parent of a child with achondroplasia.
Let's do it. So first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm very pleased to do this in particular because one is David requesting, and David has been a very relevant and important person in the patient advocacy world in the pharmaceutical industry connected with achondroplasia. And he's a nice guy as well. So where all this started, you know those times, when you are just living your life and planning the next vacation and the next kid and everything goes pretty much you can expect. So I was already a mother. I had a boy, 2 years old, and we decided, why not? Let's go for the second one. And at this time, I was also starting a PhD on veterinary sciences. Well, I'm a vet, by the way. And everything was going under planning. I had a very easygoing pregnancy. Nothing was detected. And when Clara, a baby girl, was born in 2012, I noticed something was different. But there was no pediatrician telling me, something is different. I think I was the first that noticed that something was really not as the other kids. And in the first night, I pretty much remember that all her clothes were too big and her arms were so short that I was lying with her in our hospital bed. And I just stand up and try to see where my arms were reaching. And then I did the same exercise with her, and they were pretty much shorter as me. I know that babies don't have the same proportionality as adults, but it was not that. But even so, you always consider that everything is okay. No doctor tells you the opposite, so it's okay. But then that led us to, beside having a fantastic, super peaceful, joyful baby girl, a very devastating diagnosis 1 month later. She was diagnosed by genetic testing with achondroplasia, and that was something that you could not forget in your whole life. Because things were running just fine, but when suddenly someone puts a diagnosis in front of you of something totally unexpected, and it's not in your plans, in that moment, you just draw a line in your life to decide either you stay depressed and won't do anything else, or you have to move on and do something that will allow you, your child, and your family to surpass the surviving only. But it is excruciating feeling. I cannot imagine having a diagnosis of a condition or a rare disease that would be fatal. In this environment, connected with a lot of other patient advocates, representatives, parents, knowing dozens, hundreds of other rare conditions, I have to say I feel very lucky because it was not fatal. And most of all, because every child with achondroplasia has a cognitive capacity as any other child, and that will allow independence. But until you reach that moment that you consider all these strong points, you have to run lots of marathons emotionally, and it's a huge struggle, family struggle in accepting, like, it does look like any ordinary child, but it's not.
So the diagnosis of your infant daughter, Clara, was completely unexpected and it was life-changing, as you said. Share with us, please, what this life-changing moment was like for you.
That's a very curious question, and I will say why. Because the first time I heard achondroplasia was a geneticist that said after a full body evaluation, she was 1 week and a half, we may consider achondroplasia. And suddenly my brain, if you know that most medical terms are from the Greek and Latin, and my father was a Latin professor, a professor of Portuguese and Latin and Greek, so I had a lot of that knowledge on medical background. It was pretty easy for me in the university because I could understand the words before I was told what they were related to. And then my brain was immediately separating the words. A, negative, it's Greek. Chondros, cartilage. Plasia, growth. And suddenly, my mind was put with the figure of a person with achondroplasia. But it was immediately like, my brain did that. And my husband was like considering, what is that after all? And then the clinician was explaining, but I was stuck there. I had my mind on that because in my first year of pre-university year, I had a colleague with achondroplasia. And she was just a colleague as any other colleague. But then I remember her like, wow, life goes round and round and round. And then what hit me was, and what will be her life like? What will be the challenges beyond the social challenges? I was stuck a lot of time with the social hurdles, the image, the figure, being different. Everyone wants to be different, but not that different. And the physical and medical hurdles was really something that I needed to get explained quickly. And then the geneticist, 1 month later, after our genetics testing came positive for achondroplasia, she just gave me a document from Trotter and all for the management of achondroplasia. And bye-bye, see you in next year. Okay. So I had to read that all, and I just use that as my ground base on action. But you'll have more questions after. But it was really important, that document, to start. But also I realized that was not that much other information available at that time.
Thank you, Inês. I wonder if we could take you back to that moment about hearing the diagnosis. You have a medical veterinary background. Did you know much about achondroplasia? What was your understanding at that moment? And how did that affect how you thought about having a child with achondroplasia?
Yeah, what was really striking was that when I read what was really important to do in the first year of life of a child with having achondroplasia, and I saw all the struggles and hurdles to get all the specialties involved and the exams that were suggested and to be done at a certain age, it was clear that no one was prepared. And when I'm mentioning no one, is healthcare professionals was prepared to deal with achondroplasia. They basically didn't know what achondroplasia was. Maybe they saw another child years before. This was in a central pediatric hospital in Lisbon, one of the most well-known. So they were lost in that hospital. So you can try to figure out how in other hospitals that are regional, they would react. And I was basically saying to the clinicians, you have to do this exam, and you have to do that, and you have to do that. And maybe they struggle a little bit on those requests. Most healthcare professionals don't like to be told what to do, but they basically know nothing about the subject. So I was really guiding them. And when I discovered that in the amount of medical appointments and surgeries, unfortunately, we had a few, that I managed to take care of Clara as the best way I could do it and try to reunite the best care possible. One day I started to think, and what about the others? And I have to also mention that I live in a very small city in Portugal. I'm not living in Lisbon. Lisbon is the capital. So many people don't live in the capital. And I had to request to her pediatrician, please request an appointment to that central pediatric hospital in Lisbon. It did. It told me, anything you need, you just tell me and I sign below. You just need to say what to write. And that guy was awesome. But he was conscious that he didn't know about that. And I requested the first appointment for her in that central pediatric hospital. And I had a note of reply saying, child out of zone. You don't have to be here. You just stay in your regional hospital. And that for me was pretty much impossible to just deal with. And this piece of the story I'm telling you is one of the parts that led me to do something. I got that notice of child out of zone, so you cannot come here. And in that day, I called an uncle that was director of one of the central hospitals in the Lisbon area. And in the day after, I was with Clara in an appointment. And I usually don't do that. And it was really hard to do that. But if I didn't do that, I don't know exactly what would have happened. And while I see a lot of parents still struggling in having care, because fortunately today in Portugal, we have a special consultation within a central pediatric hospital where all the children are referred to since they are born. And we have a lot of other clinicians in other clinical centers along the country, including islands. We have Madeira Island and Azores. And they are getting there. They are not left without information. And that is a game changer.
So as I was listening to you, Inês, I could see when the birth of an advocate occurs, for you it occurred when you realized that no one, even at the specialists in the Hospital of Lisbon, really understood what kind of care a child with achondroplasia needs, and that you went into high gear to make sure that they became aware of the care that was needed. Now, your personal story and Clara's story is also really important to us. So I'd once again like to go back on, you said she had some surgeries and some medical complications. And I think it would be helpful to understand what that's like, because that's part of the experience of a family who has a child with achondroplasia.
So it wasn't easy. It was really quite challenging. And at that time, it was professional challenging as well. It's also very important to mention that when a child needs specific care, parents have to be absent of work for many days. And in the case of Clara, she had a lot of issues when she was very young. She had severe sleep apnea. It was really difficult to deal with ventilation machine. Also, she was diagnosed with foramen magen stenosis. She had very complex and continuous and chronic otitis. Still, she was smiling and looking at all the people so calmly. But at that time, it's also important to mention that I was really blocked with making sure she was getting the best care possible while she was really facing difficult, challenging situations due to achondroplasia. And while I was blocked emotionally with medical care, I was not really paying attention to my child. In the day she was under surgery for the foramen magen stenosis, and she was in the operating room for 8 hours or 7. Pretty much remember a brown couch in a corridor that I maybe traveled all those 7 hours, so many miles run on that corridor. I just noticed that no effort was meaningful if she was not alive. And that was my click point. Like, okay, from now on, take care of your child and yourself emotionally. Look at that gorgeous girl, always smiling at you, and get in love with her. And I did that. And it was much better living from that day on. I just regret to have waited 9 months for that. So if you ask me what my regret is, it was not being in love with her since she was born. And that is really my only and solely regret.
So being really attentive to the medical care that she needed, including a very frightening surgery for foramen magen stenosis, made it really difficult for you to just enjoy being her mom. And it's hard to be a loving parent and also to be really focused on the kind of medical care she needed. And during that surgery, while you paced the floors, you came to realize, well, this is my child that I love, and I'm going to focus on loving and try to do both of these things at the same time.
What is really important, and I wrote this several times, it's really about enjoying and appreciating each single moment when she was able to climb a stair alone, or when she was able to sit by herself. And that takes time. Yes, it takes a lot of time, especially when you have another child and you are able to do comparisons on time. And I just wanted to forget about comparing her with other kids or with my oldest child, to allow her to do things on her time, but not to leave that too much open, because I want to make sure that she was gaining towards a good development, having achondroplasia, but not living like, oh, one day she will eventually walk. No, it was not just medical care. It was the multiplicity of therapies. It's not just thinking about surgeries or medicines or treatments. It's a life, it's a person. It's really going to the pool. It's going to occupational therapist. It's going to the physical therapist. Is having time to play with the dog to play with her and the brother as well, and be able to enjoy the simple moments. So it's really hard to explain to a person what is living in constant fear of another diagnosis. It was really bad in the beginning when we had a diagnosis for foramen main stenosis, and after surgery saying, okay, everything is on place, fantastic. We found a subdural hematoma that was really pressuring her left brain, like, guys, will this stop? It was one thing after another. And having a very resilient kid, never crying in the ER emergency rooms while we were admitting for months. Maybe if I sum all up, I have to say that I spent in the hospital more than 150 days. She's turning 9. It's a lifetime. You get to appreciate things in a different way. The only thing I consider that is positive is that most challenges she doesn't remember because she was really young, but we do. And it's still hard for me to talk about those moments. You know that we get strength and we are more empowered and we are able now and honored to support other parents. But when you go back to those moments, piece of you is always hurting a lot.
Life as a parent of a child with achondroplasia, there have been many challenges. And one of the challenges is to be very attentive to the care that she needs, to spend a lot of time in the hospital and to be focused on healthcare and preventing injury, but also to be like other families and living life, playing with the dog, playing with other children. So Clara is almost 9 years old now. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about what her life and your lives are like from the early period, diagnosis, and then, now she goes to school. What is life like now?
Well, life fortunately is with less hospital visits, so that's really good. She has grown as a very resilient, very aware of her body. It was really at a young age, around 3.5, 4, that she noticed that comparing it with other children in the kindergarten, but mostly saying, when I get to be as tall as you, I will be able to do this and that. And I never lied to any of my kids. And I said to her, you will grow up, but never as tall as me. And I had not the why at that moment, but 1.5 years later, maybe. So she knows she has achondroplasia since she is 4. And she always wanted to try everything, but always very aware of her body capacities. Very spiritual to try things in different ways. And regarding socializing with other kids, always very attentive of comments and looks. She pretty much hates when we go to the supermarket or just go to the street, and she knows that people are looking at her. And she deals with that pretty much well. She dislikes totally when people touch her or say, oh, what a cutie. She doesn't like that at all. I also don't like that. But it was really hard, and I'm going back a little bit, really hard in the beginning when she was very young. While she was 7-8 months, she was looking like a 3-year-old due to the size of her head. So people ask, oh, how old is she? 9 months. And the reaction of people was really retract. Don't ask anything else. Go away. So sometimes I felt the need to say, she's 3. But then what was really funny when she started to walk, while I was walking the street with her and speaking with her as I'm speaking with you now, that was when people looked at her like, what a baby girl, she's so advanced speaking at this age. No, she's not 2, she's 6. So now she can react much more proactively when people react to her. I told her, when someone asks you, why do you look like that? You just respond, I'm Clara, I'm 4, I have achondroplasia, and I grow very, very slowly. Do you want to play? Yeah. And that worked it out. In her personality, beyond being resilient, I'm astonished as an nearly 9-year-old girl is almost a pre-adolescent. So she just has reactions as a pre-adolescent. So that's terrible. But that has nothing to do with achondroplasia. It's really her personality. So she is really eager always to do things. She always did cycling and swimming. But last year, she started to do athletics. And it was very challenging for her because she was always saying to me, I will be last every single time. I say to her, you are not competing with any other of those kids. First, you are competing with yourself. And when you want to compete, you will go to the Paralympics and you go to another championship with people that have short stature, and then you can compete. But now you compete with yourself. And in the first class, it was really, the request was, I need to be alone there with the teacher, not with other kids. Okay. And then another class and another kid and another kid. And she is now much more at ease with it. And 2 months ago, she got in her first competition, a city competition, a very small event. And she ran 600 meters, 0.4 miles without stopping. She came last, of course, but first for me and for everyone else. And it was delightful because everyone was cheering her like, Clara, Clara, go. And she never gave up. So for me, it was one of the best moments until now.
That's beautiful. You know, Inês, well, first of all, congratulations to Clara on her 600-meter race and the support that you received from the crowd. But some of the reactions of people that you described before really bring home the point that a child with achondroplasia faces a world of disability, not her own disability, the disability of the rest of us, to appreciate that someone who's different is a full human being, but we just want to categorize them as something else. I hope that we as the human race improve somewhat on that. So you started out learning to be an advocate so Clara can receive the kind of care that she needs. What was your path to becoming an advocate for people with achondroplasia and with skeletal dysplasias overall? How did that get started?
That is still surprising to me. And I have to say, my personality is that I'm really a very private person. Doesn't look like, but I'm very private. And it was really challenging. And I just felt that I had the obligation to do something. And I have to say that I pick up studying veterinary medicine to not contact with people. I mentioned already that it was really a struggle to get the best care. And then considering that other parents would struggle also. And seeing deep inside how the healthcare system was working, I was really in the need to change something. And one day I met a clinician, a geneticist that was very human, very passionate for his profession, and very knowledgeable on skeletal dysplasia. And he told me that we are just missing so many things here. And I told him, well, I feel the need to do something, but I'm not sure if it is the right step to do as a patient organization. And then at that moment, it just opened his eyes to me. And I think we connected and communicated, not verbally at that time, saying, let's do it. And fortunately, he has been working so well because he is leading the multidisciplinary care team in the pediatric hospital of Coimbra in central Portugal. But before that, when Clara was 9 months old, it was really eager to know where research was being done. I knew at that time when she had her diagnosis that someone somewhere would have been studying achondroplasia. So let's find those guys. And when I started to talk to A and B and C from different continents, I just lost my fear to contact people from other countries. And that trigger willingness to know more and more and more. It's like a domino falling. Like each time a piece falls, you know that you want another one to fall. And I decided that, okay, I had to do something, but I didn't know exactly what. I was working during the day, as most of the people, and at night I was reading all the papers I could find about achondroplasia. And one day I was in the sofa at night with my husband reading a paper and very enthusiastically explaining FGFR3, and he just looked at me and said, I don't understand anything you're saying to me. Like, damn, I didn't realize that. And he has a major in economics. So what about all the parents that have degrees, but not in medicine or biology? Are they not entitled to know what is this about? And that it was the click point. Okay, let's do something. And I thought for 2 weeks about a name for a blog, which I called Beyond Achondroplasia, because I know that has to be beyond the condition itself. And I try to summarize important thematics around achondroplasia and genetics to facilitate the understanding of other parents. And that started to grow and grow and grow and grow. And suddenly I was being reached out by people from the Arctic and the Antarctica, a lot of different countries. And I was still doing my veterinary practice, but it was less and less. My PhD just fall down. Like, I don't care about that, really. I just want to read about genetics and read about medical care on achondroplasia. And that led me to create Endo Portugal. The way to evolve and to keep supporting others, it's really to know other people, understand other issues, which led me to collaborate with the EURORDIS, the European Organization for Rare Diseases, and to know a lot of other people working for other rare conditions. That was really impressive stories, relevant, very powerful, that made me think, what can we do to better support other parents? But as my background is scientific, and I really like science, I'm always pushing for research. And was really about, when I reached out to QED and to you, David, was really about knowing, what are you doing with this product? Following research, now provoking for research. That's the way to go for me. Maybe some patient leaders and organizations focus solely on social matters, or education, or physical therapy, occupational therapy. Those areas are really important, but I mostly dedicate time to research. It's something in my blood, so I have to do it. It has been a very important process and got me to know a lot of interesting programs and also people. So I keep working on that.
I would like to thank you first for your work on behalf of people with achondroplasia and people with rare diseases. And of course, second, for participating in this podcast. It has been fascinating listening to you about your personal experience, about how that was transformative to you as an individual, from being someone who kind of avoided being with people and speaking to people, to one of becoming a public figure and speaking to a lot of people.
It's still hard for me to deal with that, believe me, really.
Yeah, and although you do it extremely well.
Thank you, David. Again, I think this is an opportunity to increase not just the awareness of achondroplasia itself, but for all professionals in QD and BridgeBio, and maybe beyond, to celebrate people and lives. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Inês, for taking the time. It's been a real pleasure.
So much from that story. It was especially moving to hear she develops patience and certainly a lot of grace, that managing this condition is important and necessary, but it doesn't have to be in exchange for experiencing the joy of raising a beautiful young girl.
You know, I always wonder when I meet someone who has devoted herself to advocacy like Inês. What transformed her from a parent to an activist? And I think Inês states it very clearly that she went through a time when the healthcare providers didn't really know how to treat her daughter Clara, what kind of tests to perform, what kind of interventions were needed, and that because she had experience as a veterinarian, landed up teaching the healthcare providers what to do. And then she realized other parents are going through the same thing, and it really makes sense for her to try to educate other parents and healthcare providers about the medical needs of children with achondroplasia.
And her teachings didn't stop there. It really extended to her daughter, who she taught to be her own advocate. I remember she shared, she was 9 years old and Clara was on the playground, and she said, "Hey, I'm 9 years old. I'm Clara. I grow very slowly, but do you want to play?" That's pretty remarkable.
People in the dwarfism community often point out that dwarfism itself is not a disability, but the disability is created by how people of average stature act. And a big problem for children with achondroplasia and other forms of dwarfism is bullying by other children and also by other adults. And I think Inês talks about being stared at when going out in public. And she really taught Clara how to address the behavior of other people that had the potential for being disabling for Clara and other children with dwarfism and achondroplasia.
Thank you, David. And many thanks to Inês for sharing your story, and to Dr. Rogoff for your brilliant insight. And a very special thanks to our producer, Amy Brooks. To learn more about achondroplasia, visit beyondachondroplasia.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, we'd really appreciate your support by rating and, most of all, subscribing. I'm Mandy Rohrig. I hope you'll join me for our next conversation on Rare.